Titanic listed to port, it was plain she did so, for the skyline and sea on the port side were visible most of the time, and on the starboard. How do you say that word?
Starboard.
Okay, I don't know why I'm struggling. On the starboard only sky. And this guy, his name was Lawrence Beasley. He was a science teacher, so he was considered a reliable observer. And he later went on to write one of the first books about the Titanic. But anyway, what a coincidence that this very reliable science teacher observed this list to port that was...
lean to the left.
Right. Lean to the left, that the Titanic had no reason to have, but the Olympic was reported to have. Let's see.
Every time you drop one of these bombs, I expect to hear the ta-da, like sound effect. And everyone's going, like, face shocked.
So, okay, this next piece of evidence is probably one of, like, the most convincing to me. And that's the fact that there were a lot of very wealthy and prestigious people booked into the first class cabins on the Titanic.
The Macy's couple or whatever. The couple that owned Macy's, or like the founders of Macy's, they were on the Titanic.
Really? Did they die?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, continue.
That's okay. But the most notable was J.P. Morgan. So he was booked into a first-class cabin on the Titanic, and he made a huge deal about it before and telling everyone that he was going on the Titanic because it was supposed to be like the unsinkable ship and the most luxurious cruise ship ever built and all this. He was due to travel on the Titanic but canceled his trip a few days before the departure, claiming illness. But a New York Times reporter discovered this to be a lie. Morgan was actually seen perfectly well with his mistress in France on the very day the Titanic sunk.
Why did they decide to tip him off? Just because he's like rich and important?
There's that, but also some people think that he was in on it and he knew about it before because he actually
split the insurance money with him or some shit.
Well, his money funded the company that owns White Star Line.
Oh.
So he's actually one of the very top people involved in this whole scam. So they think that he could have been part of the planning of this because it was his money that he would essentially be losing if they didn't recover the insurance.
So the sinking of the Titanic was definitely an inside job. Anyways.
Could be. And,
more evidence
but the thing about that is, why would he plan to go on it at all if he knew it was going to sink? Maybe just for publicity.
Maybe he's so high up that they didn't tell him until like after he like personally just booked it himself, and then they were like, "Oh shit, he's on the like whatever charter list. We got to tell him that he shouldn't be on this ship, and why." I don't know.
Yeah, so that's very interesting and very suspicious. And there's also, it says, industrialist Henry Clay Frick and his wife, banker Horace J. Harding, and billionaire George Washington Vanderbilt, another very wealthy and powerful family name, all connected.
Homie.
Exactly. We got two of them here, Morgan and Vanderbilt.
I didn't know the Morgans were one of them.
I don't actually. The Morgans are. I don't think the Vanderbilts are.
The Vanderbilts are, for sure. Anyways, different conspiracy.
Anyway, doesn't matter. Disregard that. All connected to Morgan were amongst several other prominent figures who canceled at the last minute. So there were several prominent figures who canceled.
That's true. That's accurate. That's recorded.
Yes.
Oh my God.
They were all supposed to be on there, and they never ended up going. They canceled last minute. Very suspicious.
Super suspicious.
Yes. Okay, this is another point of evidence that is very convincing to me. This ship called the SS Californian, also owned by J.P. Morgan, was a large passenger ship that was ultimately blamed for the loss of life on the Titanic. So I don't know if you remember this from the movie, but it showed in the movie them trying to call for help from a nearby ship.
Yeah.
And they basically got no answer. And I can't remember in the movie if it showed the person asleep at the control panel.
I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen it.
I can't remember. Yeah, me too. But basically it was near enough that it could have saved almost everyone on the Titanic. But they just didn't reply to the distress signals. So there was a big investigation about why that happened and all of that. But what people think is that the Californian was purposely placed nearby the Titanic because they knew the Titanic was going to sink. And so the Californian was this big empty ship full of, the only cargo it had on board was 3,000 woolen blankets and jumpers. No passengers. And in the middle of the Atlantic. So why would this huge ship be in the middle of the ocean with no passengers?
Right. It's a huge waste of money to only have, like, a small amount of cargo, even if it is a cargo ship. Was it a cargo ship?
No, it was a passenger ship.
That makes
no
sense.
So why would it have no passengers?
Right.
And why would its only cargo be 3,000 blankets and jumpers? That's exactly what you would need to save thousands of people who are...
ice cold water.
Exactly. So it says... Was the Californian intended to rescue the Titanic's passengers after its deliberate sinking? And then survivors of the Titanic say that the officers assured her the Californian was on its way. So how would the officers have known the Californian was on its way if they weren't getting any response from it? Unless they were told ahead of time.
Right.
The plan.
They would be, yeah.
So
they must have paid off the crew that knew then, because, like, who would get on a ship with the hope that maybe the other ship that's there will save them, but the ship is assured to go down?
Yeah, exactly. And another part of this theory says that they, in spite of there being a shortage of jobs for coal workers at the time, they had a really hard time finding people to work on the Titanic in the boiler rooms because there were rumors of this whole
plan.
And then I think this article actually says when the Titanic left, it was only half full, which is...
Of passengers?
Let's see. Hold on.
And yet Jack was forced to sleep in the bottom floors with the peasants.
I know.
That was his name, right?
Yes. Okay. Despite the immense fanfare and hype that surrounded the Titanic launch, it was only just over half full when it left. So, when it left for its doomed voyage.
So a bunch of people bailed.
Yes. So, they think that there were rumors of this plan. But I have a problem with that because why would anyone get on that ship knowing it was going to sink? Like, if any of the crew knew, I would be...
But I mean, like, if you think about it, like, it was probably just, like, a current, like, conspiracy theory. Like, people, it was just, like, rumors going around. There were people that probably paid, like, lots of money for that time to get their ticket that normally couldn't afford it. They're not going to, like, not go just because someone said it might sink, you know?
Yeah. Well, if it was that, I understand. But, I mean, if there were crew that actually knew what was happening.
Because they thought they were going to get saved.
Yeah. And I can see that, but it just seems so risky to me. I wouldn't.
I wouldn't.
But maybe these people are braver than me.
I guess.
So, okay, let's go. Yeah, so anyway, with the Californian unable to complete its rescue mission, the Titanic was doomed, and about 1,500 passengers and crew perished. Okay. The last part of the evidence. Sorry, I'm just pause again.
This is the first conspiracy, right? There's a different theory, right?
Yeah, the next one's really short.
Oh, okay. Doesn't have to be. I'm excited.
Okay.
I'm already convinced.
I know. Well, to be fair, I'm going to go through the evidence against this next, and we can debate.
Right. Yes, good idea.
So, okay, so the last part... I'm going to kind of read this part because it's a little confusing for me to just say it off the top of my head and I get confused. But the last part of the evidence for this theory is involving the actual wreck of the Titanic on the bottom of the ocean floor.
Okay.
So it was discovered by Robert Ballard in 1985. Some evidence from the wreck supports the switch theory. The stamp number 401, the ID number used for the Titanic at Harland and Wolff, which is, I believe that's the shipyard that the Titanic was built at, can be seen on the Titanic's propeller. However, some authors have suggested that the Titanic propeller was fitted to the Olympic during its repair following the collision with the Hawk. If true, this would be strong evidence that the vessel on the ocean floor was really the Olympic. So basically, the Olympic was being repaired because it had that collision with...
Why would they take the propeller off the Titanic, though?
Because maybe the Olympic had a voyage coming up sooner than the Titanic and needed to be completed, and the Titanic had a working propeller, so they just went ahead and put it on the Olympic, and then they would replace the Titanic with a new one. But the Titanic, so almost everything on board the Titanic was stamped with the number 401. Like everything from parts of the boat to furniture. And so on the wreck, you can actually see that the propeller says 401 from the Titanic. So it all depends on
stuff. Like you said everything was stamped with 401, so shouldn't all the other stuff in the wreck be stamped with 401?
Yes, that's a good point, and we will discuss that in the next part of this segment. But it really all depends, because if it was actually the Titanic and they never took the original propeller off and just left it on, then that's evidence against this theory, because that would say it's really the Titanic. So it all depends on that, and I don't know if there's anything conclusive regarding whether it was switched or not. So finally, the last thing that make people think this was an insurance scam is the lack of media scrutiny. It says that insurance scams and maritime fraud were common at the time of the Titanic sinking. And so while it seems unlikely that a scam like this could be pulled off today, the lack of media coverage back then makes it a lot more likely. Because think about it, people had no reason to believe
that it was insurance
fraud.
And accident.
And there's no way they could look into anything.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have the resources that we have today. So, okay, so yes, that is all the evidence for the theory. Any thoughts?
I'm still convinced. I'm interested to hear the evidence against it. The only thing that I would say is, like, a lot of the evidence seems like it might be, like I'm much more willing to believe it if it was, written down public record. Like, obviously all those crashes and stuff were public record of the Olympic or whatever, but I don't know. Like, the personal accounts and stuff are, like, that those could have definitely been, like, someone either making it up for attention or I don't know, but I still buy it. Anyways,
I do too. There's just so many suspicious
activities going on, but like the one that freaks me out is the fact that all of those, like, important people were not, like, were booked and then never got on.
That one freaks me out too, and the fact that there's a huge passenger ship just a few miles away filled with blankets and sweaters,
and that's public record.
Yes. And that was seen as very suspicious at the time, and there was a big investigation following why was it out there and why did it not respond to any of the distress signals.
Yes, that's also, okay.
So, very suspicious. I also read another article saying that at the time, the demand for passengers to cross the Atlantic was very high, so there would have been no reason for the ship to basically lose money carrying its empty passenger ship across the Atlantic. So, very suspicious. It just makes you... So, now we're going to start with the evidence against this theory. The biggest one that stood out to me is the loss of reputation. This would damage White Star Line's reputation, like, so severely.
They're still around, aren't they?
I don't know. Good question.
Oh, sorry, but continue.
But is it worth a few $1 million to sink a ship that was marketed as unsinkable, and knowing that it would create this huge press disaster for the company and they would lose trust from, like, any future customers? No one's going to sail with this cruise ship company that just sank the unsinkable ship. So to me, it's like, they're maybe getting a cash infusion from their
They needed more
insurance, but
strategic
any
people
of